Or Yang.
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds! So nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello,
Now with this campaign, bang, dang, it's and Drew, come roll with the Yang Gang.
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
I am super excited to have Jonathan Herzog on the show. Welcome, Jonathan. How you doing, buddy?
Thank you. So good to be here. It's awesome to be back.
Well, I'll tell you, you have one of the more interesting stories I've heard in a long time, and we're going to get to your journey because you're not a typical nerd for Yang. You're doing some pretty interesting stuff right now beyond your previous work working for the campaign. Before we get into that, for people who aren't familiar with you, who is Jonathan Herzog? Where did you come from?
Who is Jonathan Herzog? Well, my parents are immigrants. I was born and raised in New York, and I came across Andrew last year when I was a student in law school, and I kind of became obsessed and just fairly certain we had to do all we could to get this guy into the White House, and had to reorient my life to make sure that would happen. So grew up in New York, just a regular kid, went to school and more school and more school. So lived the full-on nerd life growing up. And then just hit a point when I realized that this is the man, the moment, the mission, and the message, and we've got to do all we can to make it happen.
Now, you grew up in Manhattan or upstate New York, or where were you?
Yeah, so I grew up around the border of like Hell's Kitchen and the Upper West in Manhattan.
Nice, very nice. And when did you went to undergrad, and then between undergrad and law school, did you work, or did you go straight to law school?
So I went to undergrad, studied psychology, and then went to business school. So did my MBA, and then went back to law school.
Oh my God, your parents must have been thrilled. That's a lot of letters after your name if you had gone the distance, right? And then PhD.
Well, there's a lot of exposure to the institutional inertia and a lot of the forces that are really kind of shaping and undergirding the campaign in many ways.
Seriously. Now, did you go straight from undergrad to B school, or did you work?
Yeah.
Oh, you did. You went straight through.
That's right.
Oh, wow. So you are highly educated, and you were like, I'm ready to do some to get out of the academy for a little bit, I guess.
Well, so I was like full on, kind of ivory tower, coastal elite.
Yeah.
And I thought, if I could lend sort of any credibility from this little bubble, this little enclave, then hopefully we can open up the floodgates. Because all we need is to get over that little hump, the activation energy, and just recognize that we can do so much more, and we have to do it for ourselves. We can't rely on anyone else to do it for us.
So when did you first hear about Yang? Because it sounds like you probably were early adopter, like pre-Rogan, maybe, or no? Or was you? Were you touched by Rogan as well, like so many of us?
So I came across the New York Times launch last February of 2018. And I'd followed a bit of his work with Venture for America and was just so inspired and moved because I saw 60% of my classmates at Harvard College do the things anecdotally that he was describing empirically by the data, right? Where you see all the institutional funnels and pressures to go into consulting and banking and finance and pre-med and pre-law. And these are people who are tapped from all over the country and the world with all these platitudes and aspirations and all sorts of compelling marketing. But then you look where they actually end up and the forces that they're doing and driving our economy. And I was like, wow, this guy actually comes from within the system, calls out the problems, and is building a new pathway. And just really calling out the BS that pervades the entire system. So that's when I had first come across Yang, and I saw this launch, and I was like, holy shit, this guy's our next president. And I would just talk to people around me and they'd be so incredulous and be like, oh, okay, like Jonathan's just, a little crazy. I don't know why he's following this random guy. And over time, I just, follow the campaign, and I was like, okay, this is it. This is the man. This is the message. This is what we need. But why are there, 5 or 6 people in a town hall in New Hampshire? This is like maybe last summer. And so kind of really just inspired by Andrew and his whole ethos, I was like, what if we just organize on campus at Harvard and put together an event and had him come last year. And we had a pretty large turnout. It was focused on Asian American leadership and the future of that. And Andrew then asked, he was like, can you move out to Iowa for me? And I was like, the gay Jew from New York at Harvard Law School, like that is not, that and Iowa, like probably don't go together so well.
It's not the first thing you think of when you hear Iowa.
Not the first thing you think of. A lot of things I had to scrub from, my, but so basically, the answer just became, well, no one else is doing it, so you got to step up. You got to go leave law school, move to Iowa, and figure it out, because that's what Andrew did, right?
Yeah.
He looked at the field and said, no one else is addressing these fundamental issues. No one else is stepping up. And so it was really just because of him and his leadership that I ended up moving out to Iowa and having the incredible adventure that was.
So how much Yang time did you get between first hearing about him and then deciding to leave school to go to Iowa? Like, in terms of one-on-one time, like, did you have a lot of information, or was it a little bit of a leap of faith, or how well did you know this guy? So
I didn't know him at all. I was just enraptured. I had watched his videos and YouTube clippings, from the early days, kind of religiously. In this bizarre vacuum that we live in of truth-telling and really leadership and vision, I was just like, holy crap, this guy is actually doing something that can really move the needle and kind of move us forward. And so I hadn't met him, hadn't spoken to him at all until we brought him to campus. And I kind of got a sense of what the campaign looked like. And I was just like a third-party outsider kind of watching it all from the outside in. So none at all, which is again why people thought I was crazy.
That is so. Did you have was it a one-on-one conversation with him, or was it someone on his staff that said, hey, we need help in Iowa? Or did he put his hand on your shoulder and look in your eyes and say, Jonathan, I need you, man. I need you to do this for me?
Well, basically, yeah. I mean, so it was just after this event, and it was just like Zach, him, and a friend of mine here who had helped run the event, named Daniel. Lost you.
Oh,
are you there?
I'm back.
Okay.
You said Daniel, your buddy Daniel, Zach, and you guys are talking after the event.
Yeah. Sorry, I just lost.
Are you back? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So after the event, you, Daniel, Zach were catching up, like putting away some folding chairs, and then what happens?
Yeah, and so we all kind of sat down for dinner with Andrew, and I was like, oh wow, this is what the campaign is at this point. Again, this is fall of 2018. There's like five folks on the team. It's like there's no media, no polling, no money, no nothing. This is really like truly when the articles and the history books come out on this campaign, when he wins his second term in the White House. This was the most grassroots, early stage growth startup you could ever imagine. And it's just so incredible and moving, like to tears at many points, to see how this has become mainstream and just blown up, especially in the last maybe 6 months or so.
So how long between that event, which, by the way, not only did you go to Iowa as a, Upper West Side non-Iowan, but you also put on an Asian American leadership event, which is awesome.
Because that was so crazy to me. I mean, that's what was so confusing to me is I was like, wait, hold on. Am I not processing the fact this is the first Asian American man to run for president as a Democrat?
Yeah.
And I'm in like a hotbed of Asian American leaders and scholars, people here and I'm like, why is no one getting around this yet?
Yeah.
And that's really the key point. And that's what I just saw at kind of every turn is if I can, do anything, hopefully it's to like open the floodgates, just like let people feel like this is a thing, this is a movement, this is something you can get behind, and then kind of let them lead the way. But yeah, it was really shocking at first.
Yeah, I was looking at some polling data the other day, and something like 2/3 of Asian American Democrats are not supporting Yang. They're like mostly
Not
in
yet.
the Biden camp. And it's, I remember that also was a challenge for Obama, getting African American supporters, because he just early days wasn't able to really get that groundswell. But as you mentioned, not yet is a good way to put it, because I think the best is yet to come. So.
Yeah.
So you had the event, and then how soon after before you pack your bags?
Oh gosh, it was not very soon after. So I was like very entrenched in the institution. I was like co-president of student government, and very involved on campus and whatever. Did not think that this would happen, and so I kind of folded up shop at the end of the semester, and yeah, just a couple of weeks later, literally, got on a flight to Iowa City, and then just figured it out from there.
Now you were 1L, or what year were you at the law school?
I was a 1.5 L, so I'd finished half of the degree.
And what was the conversation like with the parents?
Well, it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
probably a deeper dive, but yeah, definitely a sense of like, you're crazy, it's a phase, whatever. You can like get it out of your system, right? I guess better now than later. But I think it's safe to say we feel pretty vindicated, and that's been the process throughout, right? At every turn, people are starting to catch on and realize, oh, didn't mean to write you off before.
Right. Now, if for whatever reason at some point you decide that you want to finish the degree, can you start from your second year over and kind of, or do you have to reapply, or are you just like you're done with the degrees?
So I'm actually so right now I'm actually nominally here. I'm nominally at the law school. But like most of my time is actually going out to New Hampshire and canvassing, or going to New York and campaigning. But right now I am nominally enrolled.
Oh, okay. So you're still at the law school, but are you taking classes or?
Yeah. Well, so again, I'm like enrolled in my classes right now.
With a quote?
with a quote.
Yeah.
Heavy quote.
Yeah. That's crazy. That's crazy. Well, clearly you are multitasking. So, and how much of your time is spent, you said canvassing in New Hampshire, but you have your own race to run. Like, are you dividing your time between the Yang campaign and your own, or like, how do you balance that?
Yeah, I mean, so my main focus right now is it's like, if we have the, number 1 and 2 goal, which is like get the freedom dividend across the finish line and like the whole humanity first agenda, right? It's like, well, the number one way to ensure that happens is to get Andrew Yang into office and bring this wave so that he has a mandate nationally. And we're like 100 days out basically from the first caucus and the first primary. And I think, I've been so inspired by your work and all the, Yang Gang and Padgett and everyone online, where I think we need to galvanize even harder around the 30 million this quarter, and just like not accept anything else. So my kind of emphasis has been like, right now I'm just closer to New Hampshire, and so just kind of hitting the ground there, and going out there and canvassing. But I really think like, and this is my kind of impatience coming out throughout the process, but like we can do this. We can do this. Like, there's nothing stopping us. And we're at this moment where we can truly, truly send him all the way. And so I think that, ironically, what's going to come out of this like grassroots movement is money is going to speak the loudest. And if we hit that 30 million, when we hit that 30 million mark at the end of December, like that can be the true inflection point. So yeah, I mean, I'm just like, how do we like look at all the variables and options we have in front of us that optimize for the outcomes and the goals that we all want?
Yeah. So what is your primary in New York?
Yeah, so that's why it ends up being fun where the calendar works out, because my primary is actually a lot later. So the primary is in June 23rd of 2020. It's in the summer of next year. And the ballot signature collection is actually after Super Tuesday. Yeah.
Perfect.
So the calendar actually works out really well. And then the numbers of that race in particular are also really stark in that for us to win in New York's 10th district, which is the west side of Manhattan and South Brooklyn, we literally just need 15,000 votes. That is it. This is in the gayest, most Jewish, one of the most highly educated and young districts in the country, where there's like nowhere else I could plausibly run. And it's like, wait, this is actually kind of exactly crafted for that. So by the numbers, it's an extremely winnable race, but thankfully the calendar lets us, focus all of our energies on getting Yang in first.
Now, not to mention, if we have a really strong Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina showing, and you guys campaign together, if he just shows up at one event with you, I mean,
this is the thing, right? Like, we are like, this whole movement has been carried through with literally no institutional support, no media support, very even little capital injection into any of the early states. So it's all really understating kind of where the support and where the potential was at. There is no limit. There's no ceiling. And that was part of my goal in running as well, is to open up the floodgates to say, hey, if you're Yang Gang and anywhere across the country, I literally Googled, like, what does it, like, how do you run for Congress? And like, turns out you have to be 25 by the day of inauguration, have been a citizen for at least 7 years. You Google FEC Form 1, FEC Form 2, you open a bank account and you're running for Congress. And if we decide that we're gonna take this all the way, there's nothing stopping us.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I definitely want to dig into your race because I'm quite curious about how your game plan. But before we get into that, I got to ask you what that was like getting off the plane I don't know. I've never been to Iowa, but I have this image of like corn and stuff. And just, it's not like Columbus Circle, right? It's a very different vibe. And I'm curious, like, what was that like? You get off the plane. I'm sure you didn't have an entourage with you when you're setting up shop there.
No.
What was that? What was that like? Were you like, oh shit, what did I do?
Yeah. So okay, so let's like break down, because there's all these like fancy like stupid terms that are used. Like, it's like, here's the reality of what it was. So you get there, and actually Andrew talked about this recently. He was like, we were in Iowa campaigning when it hit negative 50 degrees, the coldest like day on the books, essentially. And this was, I think, January of this year, where we had all these events planned, and literally the entire city of Iowa City was just shut down. And so it was basically ranging from like 0 to negative 50 degrees. And I was based at Iowa City, and you would drive 3 hours to get to, let's say, Urbandale, or just like some tip of the state where some local gathering of Democrats would be gathering at a church or a union hall, or some other local Democratic gathering. And then I would speak there, make the pitch, bring the clipboard and some pins, kind of set up shop. And then you'd have Amy Klobuchar, then you'd have John Delaney, and then you'd have Mary Ann, and then a person from Pete's camp. It's like you'd have the whole entourage of like every other representative or candidate themselves there. And then you kind of pack up shop, You drive 3 hours, go to the north tip of the state, and do the same thing over and over again. And so that was what it was. And then, trying to have kind of sit downs with people to build events and find hires, local hires. But that's what it was. It's just get in your car, make the pitch, and just like build person to person to person.
And how many other Yang 2020 staffers were in Iowa when you got there?
So it was me and Carly for the first bit. And then it was just me.
Wow. And then what kind of hours are you working? Like, what's the lifestyle like of a campaign staffer in Iowa?
So this is probably, I don't know, probably maybe anomalous. Again, just given the unique nature of the campaign and the upstart kind of startup nature of it. But the notion of hours is just even funny to me, where it's like, oh, there's an event 3 hours north on, Saturday at 9 a.m. So you get up at 5 a.m., you go drive there because this is how our democracy works. Like these handful of Iowans get to decide, the future course of our history. So yeah, there weren't exactly, hours or.
It's just like you're always on. Is that how it works? Like you're always working.
I mean, by our own choosing, it's like, it's like what felt necessary in a way.
Yeah. Now, if you look at the crowds he's generating in Iowa today, I'm guessing you must look at that like a little bit like a proud father. Like, oh my God, I was there when, you could barely, probably get 100 people together.
Yeah, I mean, it's just amazing. Like, I love that now we can take everything and the whole infrastructure and the whole base for granted. And that's awesome. That's exactly where we should be and how we should be thinking about it. Where, of course, anywhere Yang shows up, there's going to be at least a Yang of folks, to kind of gather. And yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly the direction. And I think Andrew actually talks about this in his book, where part of entrepreneurship he talks about, it's like parenting in a way, where to do an effective job, part of it is this planned obsolescence, right? Where if you're actually doing a good job, you're making yourself kind of either automatable or replaceable because you've created a system in place or a set of processes that kind of run on their own. And that's just so awesome to see now, as the campaign really does run on its own.
Yeah. And what has it been like over that period of time, getting to know Andrew a little better? So it sounds like before you joined the team, you had some interaction with them, but not a ton. It's not like you guys were hanging out every day. And then, but then I'm guessing, being the man in Iowa, you probably saw him a little more often than before you set up shop there. Can you share a little bit about what's he like, when the cameras are off? Because most of us have not met him personally and have not had that interaction the way you probably have.
Yeah, well, so we had a lot of really long car rides together.
Yeah, I bet.
I think one thing I'm trying to pull up some good memories or stories from it is one thing that kind of comes to mind is we had very different tastes in music. And so I would be behind the wheel and I would be blasting my top 40, I don't know, Katy Perry or Shawn Mendes or some other bizarre selection. And there was this one moment where driving to Sioux City from Des Moines or something late at night, and we're the only car on the road, and that was just a common occurrence where you're the only car, and oh wow, this is humanity. Yeah. And Andrew made this comment. He was kind of just observing the fact that he was sitting in a car with me and our and Luke and Carly, listening to what he considered cheap, trashy music in the middle of nowhere. And he was like, wow, this is what we're doing. And I was like, Andrew, that's not nice.
Yeah.
I was like, this is great music, first of all. Second of all, this is it. This is the revolution of reason.
This is the life, man. Now,
I think like,
did he ever make any requests to change the station or put on something else, that he wanted?
oh, well, he was very understanding for most of it. And I think once it hit like 3 a.m. and we were driving back from the event, I think we like turned the tunes onto like 80s or 90s or something unrecognizable to me. But I was like, okay, I guess this is what like normal people listen to.
Back in the day, the ice age of the 90s. Yeah.
Yeah. This is not familiar at all.
Did he ever give you advice when you were deciding to make the run for Congress? Like, how did that? So you already had this huge shift from law school to setting up the Iowa office. And then you say, well, let's just make it even more interesting. I'll freaking run for Congress. Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, so the arc of it kind of follows along where it's like, all right, we have the man, we have the message, we have the moment. So I'm just like a reverse engineer. Like, how do we kind of get the variables and kind of systems in place to make that happen? And at the moment last year, it was like, well, you got to move to Iowa to make that happen. Mm-hmm. Now, once you're there, now once he's on Rogan, now once we have this kind of exponential growth and pathway, and we're actually making hires, local Politico hires,
right.
Then you kind of reach the point of again, like planned obsolescence, where it's like, again, the kind of gay Jew from New York who goes to Harvard Law School, like, resonates particularly well in one district and one district alone. And that happens to be New York's 10th district, the west side of Manhattan, Hell's Kitchen, Chelsea, West Village. And so it was kind of this, natural progression in some way. But also I looked at the data on that particular congressional seat, and it was shocking, where you have an incumbent, a 27-year incumbent, who's never faced a serious primary challenger. And the only primary election there was in 2016. And in order to win the seat, based on that one data point we have, you literally just need 15,000 votes. This is in a district of 750,000 people, where only 4% of people voted in the one primary election they had. And so you see this disconnect, you kind of see this gap, and you're like, oh, wait, like there's this bizarre opportunity there where the chair of the judiciary is running for re-election as an incumbent. And so that was very interesting, because it just seemed eminently winnable, in the same way that Andrew beating Trump seems eminently winnable. And then part of it as well is to, again, now there's at least, I think, dozens of people running in districts across the country, from like school board and city council to Congress to Senate now, who have endorsed UBI, or at least or endorsed some version of the freedom dividend. And if history tells us anything, it's like having the executive, having the president is critical. It's of vital importance, especially in the rare case they have a true mandate. But having a unified legislature around a legislative agenda is the only way you actually get that passed and enacted. And we saw that during the Obama years. So that kind of course of events just kind of led itself to where I am now.
Yeah, so let's talk about this race. Now, I could argue, I don't know anything about the 10th district, but I could surmise that perhaps the reason why there was such low turnout was because, like, you have this massive incumbent who's got tenure up the wazoo. He's on the big time committees. Of course, no one would challenge him, but once anyone for real challenges him, he's going to pull out all the stops, and it's going to be really hard. I mean, was that not intimidating at all? Like, you're going against like a dynasty almost, So
I dug deep and actually even spoke with the challenger at that who challenged him then, and he pulled out all the stops then. And anyone who's an incumbent entrenched in some political power will always pull out all the stops to ensure, particularly in the wake of the 2018 cycle. And hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars were spent at that time. Obama was called on to make robocalls for him. So no punches were pulled at that time.
And he only won by 15,000.
What's that?
And he only won by 15,000 votes, or
no? So he won by a landslide, but only 4% of people voted.
I see.
In its entirety. So I think there were only about 28 or 29,000 people who voted in the election.
Crazy. Yeah. And but what in the primary or in the actual election?
So this district in New York's 10th district is a D+26 district, which means that basically whoever has the D next to their name wins in the November general election.
Right.
So it is one of the most heavily liberal, progressive enclaves.
So the real election is the primary.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's the one where he pulled out all the stops and he didn't win by that much.
Oh, I mean, he won proportionally by a landslide, but because of all the forces of New York politics, where there are 3 different election dates, where you have the federal, presidential, congressional, and state primaries all on different dates, and all the traditions of New York incumbents being deeply entrenched, he hasn't been challenged in in kind of 3 decades. So he won that by a landslide, but again, no one voted because no one had a reason to vote. Yeah.
Now, did I heard that now there are other people challenging him in addition to you. And so how many other people are going to try and give him a primary challenge in total now?
So there were 4, including me. One of them recently dropped out. And by general consideration, there is one other sort of serious contender. But I think there's officially 3 or 4 of us kind of still in the race. And
do you, it's hard to get polling data for early states, even for the presidential primaries. What's the polling? What data are you looking at?
Oh, there's no polling data. There's nothing in the district. Again, it's like, I thought about it some time ago, and one question came up. Well, what might be the thresholds for a debate in the district, let's say? And we've never had a debate. There's never been any such thing as a televised debate in the district. So there's the electoral data is from 2016, but demographic data and the potential we have in the district is what shocked me. Where again, 750,000 people. This covers Wall Street, the world's financial capital. And you have this extreme concentration of wealth with 1 in 6 people literally living below the federal poverty line. It's in many ways like the ground zero for the winner-take-all economy that we see nationwide. It's just more polarized, more extreme. And it happens to be this liberal, progressive district as well. Yeah. It's amazing the amount of income inequality that you can observe in that one district, because it sounds like you have both, like literally both extremes. You have some of the richest people in the country, and then you've got people who are making probably less than $1,000 a month. Yeah, you have extreme levels of squalor and public housing and poverty. Again, literally, I had to check this stat like 4 times in the census data, 16% of people in the district. And then the district covers from Morningside Heights, from Columbia University, all the way down south. So every Wall Street investment bank, corporate law firm you can imagine is encompassed in this district. So yeah, the extremity and the polarization is no more pronounced in many ways than there. And how are you finding your message resonating in the district? Do people feel like, do you sense an openness to UBI, or do you feel like it's an uphill battle? How are they reacting? Yeah, so by the data, the Hill study that came out, a majority of Democrats and a larger majority, particularly of urban Democrats, support a universal basic income. So there actually is latent support for the policy. It just hasn't been tested on the waters, right? Because no one has ever run on it before. But again, like part of why I'm going out to New Hampshire to canvass and just focusing on making sure we can get Yang in first is many of the institutions and cities I've been living in and kind of based in are lagging indicators of national sentiment and lagging indicators of where the country is heading. It's kind of become cliche at this point when Andrew says Washington, D.C. is a town of followers, not leaders, but it's not only just accurate, it's emblematic of a whole host of cities and institutions that are falling apart. So I think part of the hope, part of the plan is, again, like get Yang in, build the wave, have it come crashing down. And then if we can sweep some seats along with that, fantastic. That would be awesome. But really, again, it's like these cities, these institutions will only follow once we've surpassed that activation energy and kind of hit that point of becoming so mainstream, they can't avoid it.
Totally. I mean, it would be a super exciting national movement at the congressional level. I know we're all focused on the presidential election. Do you coordinate with other people running for Congress who are in favor of UBI or potentially even already in the Yang Gang? Is there a Yang Gang version of the Contract with America where you guys all get together, or is it all kind of still grassroots and independent at the moment?
So there's definitely like Twitter and kind of message threads out there. We are kind of dispersed all around the country, which is fantastic in its own right. But I think right now it is very much a grassroots movement, but we are definitely connected, and everyone's on Twitter in some way or another.
Yeah. So other than UBI, are there other kind of hot topics that you think you're going to be running on, or is it going to be kind of UBI as the main thing? Like what else is your district kind of interested in right now?
Yeah. So really, I mean, there's a really strong alignment. I don't shy away from it between what Yang is running and what my run for Congress is. It's, again, there's kind of no secret behind that.
Yeah. There's some good thinking there.
But I think part of the messaging, part of what I hope to convey and kind of wake people up to is, take, for example, the fact that it happens to be one of the most Jewish districts in the country. And one of the issues of big concern is a rise in anti-Semitism, particularly in communities in South Brooklyn, where you literally have physical violent attacks against visibly Jewish individuals. And there's been a lot of commentary on this kind of marked rise in anti-Semitism, and a lot on the diagnosis, but not so much on what the solutions could be. And so one of the bridges I've been trying to push forward is, look, there are fundamental macroeconomic changes that Andrew has been championing and been sounding the alarm about, that feed into what Barry Weiss calls this conspiracy-minded ethos, which is when societies and institutions are on the verge of collapse, when truth becomes substituted with lies, and as Eric Weinstein calls, the embedded growth lies of institutions start to become seen for what they are, people search for scapegoats. And consistently throughout history, what has united the far left and the far right is that scapegoat is the Jew. And so that's one message I've been trying to convey to people in the 10th district, which is that we live in this hyper-connected, interdependent world. And even if median income in the 10th district is right now at $93,000, and you're like, oh, like, why would I need the freedom dividend? What does that mean for me and my family? Well, first of all, 1 in 6 people living across the street from you can't meet their basic needs. And second of all, if that's not compelling enough, the rates of anxiety and depression and suicide if not worse, in the halls of the corporate law offices of the investment banks, to the point where I'll have conversations with, C-suite, very wealthy, top people on Wall Street even, and they're like, they're living with anxiety about their kids' future.
Yeah.
And how is that possible? It's like in a society where the bottom is falling out and the race to cling on to the supposed rungs of meritocracy becomes that much sharper and sharper. And that's as corrosive for those at the highest income brackets as it is for those on the lowest. So substantively, the policies are identical, but demographically, it's a very different district. And that's part of the messaging.
Yeah, it's so fascinating how that whole like college admissions scandal with USC and a few other schools. I think it highlights how there are these families that have tons of resources and are doing amazingly financially well, and they have anxiety about their kids' future. And then even with my own sort of peers who have done really well in the private sector, I sense too, like when all of our kids were around preschool age and we had to get the applications and the essays and all the school visits, because everybody, I think, sensed that we've been very lucky, but the chances of the next generation kind of hitting the career jackpot as well are less than for us. And so if people with resources are freaking out about the future, you can't imagine what it must be like if someone is already at or near the or below the poverty line. And I agree with you that it's only a matter of time before people want to point the finger at some group, and it may not be pointing the finger at the root cause groups or phenomenon, or just the fact that we're having a kind of dramatic shift in the economy. It may be more convenient to point your finger at Mexicans or Jews or Asian or Chinese, whatever. Like you pick your Muslims, like everybody, I think, who isn't in the dominant group is potentially at risk of being singled out if we can't kind of shift this economy so everybody feels like they have a shot and can have a future. And so that is, I do worry a little bit about civil unrest, like, maybe not in the near future, but if you play these trends out, how worried are you? I mean, it sounds like you're saying there's actually already some increases in violence today that we're seeing.
Yeah, and I want to be, cautious, because obviously these trends are kind of multifaceted and multifactorial, and it's not purely just a malaise of macroeconomics. But in terms of what are the high variance drivers that we have control over, that we have the levers, particularly in the federal government. Like one thing that Andrew said early on that I found so compelling is we can control our capital flows in an efficient and impactful way that we can't control other systems, particularly complex systems. Like if you say, I want to overhaul education, I want to focus on social and emotional learning and mindfulness and digital and financial literacy. That sounds fantastic. But the amount of bureaucracy and agents that you have to move around and systems you have to change to make that happen are incredible and gargantuan. And we know that will take generations to come to really overhaul an industrialized education model. But capital flows, we actually can change overnight. And so that to me was so compelling, because so much of the campaign and the Yang's message is, to me, like, what do we have control over to make the world a less hostile, more flourishing and sustainable place? We have to hone in on those things we can control and optimize them for human flourishing. So that's been incredibly moving to me. And I've recently re-listened to some of David Graeber's work. He's an anthropologist who wrote that book, Bullshit Jobs. And to me, it really captures a lot of that tension that you just described, where this affects everyone. No one is left no one is left untouched by the effects of AI in the workforce, by the effects of an economy and a market driven thinking that turns us all into inputs. No one is left untouched by that. So I completely agree that hopefully this is the movement that wakes people up from all walks of life to say we can do a heck of a lot better.
Jonathan, I would be remiss if I did not ask the former head of Yang 2020 Iowa to look at some Iowa charts with me. Because it is not a Nerds for Yang live stream if we don't take a peek at some data. So I want to share my screen with you. And here you have the latest Iowa polling.
Yes.
And you know, three's the number. And what's the interesting thing is, like, it doesn't seem to align with the energy that you sense, that I sense, that we see at the rallies. But on the other hand, you know, as a man of science, I can't just completely disregard the data. And I'm curious what your thoughts are, because some people say, oh, just ignore all of this. It's only landlines. It's only old people. You're gonna be blown away come the caucuses, and we'll laugh about how Buttigieg was 6x Yang. But I don't know. I'm a little bit of a conservative guy when it comes to sort of bets and looking at data. And I was curious what the former employee number one in Iowa thinks.
Yeah, so I've I think heard a version of your take on this, and I think I agree with it, where it's the kind of simultaneous extreme optimism and belief, but extreme sense of alarm. Mm-hmm. That's why I am obsessed with this hashtag that I saw originally kind of percolate, which is the 30 mil Q4.
Yeah.
Because I completely agree. We have not done enough. We are not where we have to be. I mean, happy to kind of dive into the kind of nuances and caveats I think there are in the polling. But yes, generally speaking, the trend is Yang is steadily at 3%, right? Steadily in fifth or sixth place, depending on the poll, with some kind of movement here and there. But we need to inject this quarter, I think. Money is going to be what speaks, because at every turn we're like, oh, the media can't ignore the Iowa speech, right? They can't at every single turn we're like, we have some faith, some lingering faith in the institutions to kind of pull their weight and do their basic civic duties, really. Yeah. And we need to get even more realistic, which is that the only way this shit's going to happen is if we plow cash into the campaign. Because if you actually look at the drivers of the polling, you can see a 1-to-1 correlation with money spent. And that's especially for the recent growth in Iowa.
Yeah.
Where you saw the recent posting where there was literally, I think it was the Yang Gang Grassroots tweeted about this, the Craigslist post for Pete in Iowa, where they're like paying supporters $10 an hour to go stand outside. And this becomes a virtuous cycle, right? Where when you pay for the crowd or pay for the coverage, then that builds on itself.
Yes.
And so I think it all does, at this point, stem from the Capitol.
So, Jonathan, at the risk of sounding like an alarmist, let me share with you my view that the fourth quarter of 2019 is probably the most important fundraising quarter for Yang,
without a doubt.
Even if you assume he wins the White House,
without a doubt,
this is the one, because
this is it,
right? So my view is everybody who wants to see Yang in the White House, honestly, if you just give as much as you can this quarter and then you didn't give for subsequent quarters, it would be better than if you kind of like paced it out, because it won't help us.
There's no more waiting. There's no more waiting in the wings. I completely agree with you. I think we need to really double and triple down and make this more of a concerted emphasis, where it's not like just, oh, like give what you can. Like no, like this is go time. This is our moment.
Yeah, this is where you literally have to leave it all on the field, because the money that he's raising now and through this quarter will directly impact Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. And if we can beat expectations in Iowa and New Hampshire, like the whole world opens up to us. And if we come in like freaking 6th in Iowa and 6th in New Hampshire, like, I don't know, like I won't give up, but it's going to be the headwinds will even be ever greater. Like, good luck trying to get the mainstream media to cover you when you're 6th in South Carolina. Right? Yeah.
I mean, I don't even want to even accept those as possible outcomes. Like, I think we have literally maybe 57 days left in this quarter. Like, I think it has to be an all out onslaught to just get the campaign fed up with like there have been so many different phases of the campaign and different kind of milestones and different drivers of progress. But right now, at this moment in time, it's a money game, like plain and simple. Yeah. Where Andrew kind of puts it as, oh, like there's like blocking and tackling. But it's like, what that means is you got to spend money to put up ads. You got to spend money to build these offices. Like, a lot of it is the show of the political process. Yes. That we can deride as much as we want. With due cause. Yeah. But you gotta play the game if you want to win it. And these next 57 days or so are gonna, I agree with you, make or break it. And we can't accept that alternative.
Yeah, like if you play out the different permutations, you could say like, oh, come on, guys, like this is an unstoppable movement, which I agree. Like, it's freaking powerful. It feels very much to me like 2007 when Obama was coming up and everybody was like, well, he needs to wait his turn, he's too young, yada yada. Okay, let's say those people are right and we raise the heck out of fourth quarter and we crush it, and maybe we quote unquote over raise. That is not the end of the world where we're like, oh, I guess we kicked ass in Iowa and New Hampshire and we raised more than we needed to. It is way better than the other scenario where we look up and it's February and we're getting kind of pushed even further to the sidelines, and we all do the postmortem and say, remember when we were on the thin edge of that wedge in November, and why didn't we go for the 30? Why did we just do like a 16 million showing? Then that will, because we're not going to get another chance. We can't turn the clock back. Yeah, and I think that's the thing to me where I completely agree with you. I think it's bizarre and unacceptable that we would settle for like, oh, like let's hit 15, like let's hit 20, like we can get into number 4 or 5. Like, why would we settle? We hit 10 million in Q3 and we're like, oh my god, we're up there, surely they must take us seriously. And no, if like that, like we cannot fly in the face of the evidence, which is that no matter how much you outperform, how much you punch above your weight class, you will not be taken seriously unless you're number 1, because they can't possibly leave you off the graphic if you're literally number 1, right? They'll just have no graphic. But if you're number 6, they could like, oh, we're going to chop it off, and they're going to keep chopping it off if we keep overperforming but not winning. And I agree with you. I think we cannot settle, and this is a moment to not settle. I mean, the fact that the Yang media blackout is still a thing after we raised 10 million, we had the largest dollar increase from second quarter to third quarter, second only to Bernie. I would suggest it's actually gotten worse because the fuck is that? Like, in terms of the, correlation to how you're performing and the kind of earned media you might deserve as a result, I would say it's actually gotten much, much worse. And we have to have, I would say, an accurate understanding of how severe that is. Yeah, I mean, luckily this morning, I'm so glad that Chuck Todd and Meet the Press did not have Cory Booker on for the 168th time. And he had Yang on, and I feel like he kind of acknowledged that it was a long time coming, that Chuck did. And one thing that I would hope everybody watching this can help us with is, yes, let's call out the BS for the Yang Media
enough.
blackout.
It's not enough.
But also, let's dig deep and give just give 3 times whatever you gave last quarter.
That's it.
And you get 30 million.
It. It's as
that.
Yeah. It's as simple as that.
And third, when you do see the mainstream media cover Yang, go ahead and retweet them, like them, hashtag Yang Media, shout out. Like, let's all provide positive reinforcement to these journalists because, I mean, they're humans too. If they feel like, oh, hey, every time I talk about Yang, I get all this like positive energy and me as a journalist, I get a little more attention. That doesn't hurt.
I love your leadership and emphasis on that because I think that's so important. Really, people act out of their self-interest, right? And if journalists and reporters start to see, well, hold on, I actually get to boost my Twitter following and impressions. Like, the Yang Gang is now its own standalone political force that can amplify certain voices that have respect and, treat it with the credibility it deserves. So I completely agree, because then people start acting in their self-interest because they're like, yeah, it felt good to get 2,000 likes and approval from the Yang Gang because I gave it fair and accurate coverage. Yeah, and everybody wins, because I think when we make the argument about democracy and fairness and equal time, I think that goes over their head. I don't think they listen. Yeah, I mean, honestly, it comes down to the likes, right? And the retweets. Yeah, might as well play by the animal rules that is social media. Now, Jonathan, I know we're running close to time, so I want to make sure that 2 things. One is, if you guys in the audience, there's now 200 concurrent viewers, so that's awesome. So if anybody in the audience has questions that they want Jonathan to answer, now is the time to put it in the chat box. The second thing is, Jonathan, were there topics that you wanted to hit that we haven't yet gotten to, that we can talk about while we're waiting for the questions to roll in the chat? So there is so much I would love to talk about, and it could go on for hours, for days. I love this. I love you. I love what you do. I just love seeing like every supporting piece of evidence to show that, again, now it's kind of trite, but this mindset of abundance, just like unleashing and tapping into what we all have within us. It's like, it's freaking insane what everyone has been able to do and bring out of themselves. But I guess I just really want to hit home what we just talked about, which is we need to hit 30 million this quarter. No questions, like no settling, no debate, nothing. Like this is the moment. And I think it's kind of all hands on deck around that. I believe if we hit that number, we're going to get the White House. I really do. I believe that's the key sort of like inflection point where we invert that whole narrative, and it's going to be amazing, and it's going to be so cool. And you will have been there from the very beginning, and many of us will have been there from before he was obviously the front runner. But super excited about that. Now, someone was asking in the chat about, and maybe I had mistitled the thing. I said former staffer, but it sounds like are you still on the payroll? Are you a volunteer, or what's your current, would you describe your current status? I am a volunteer. I just like go out and canvas on my own time. So you just drive up north because you're a believer, and that New Hampshire is crucial for us. Because like we got to do what we got to do. Yeah, man, I feel you, bro. And if we can do something about it, then we like better sure as heck got to do it. Here's a question from OG Bill Bob. How much time and preparation does a campaign put into the debate? And before you answer that, I'll be honest with you. With the first debate, before it, I was like, oh, he's like a national champion in debate. He kills it in long form interviews. He knows all the facts and figures. Like, this guy's going to run circles around, Biden and others. And it felt like he needed time to adjust and figure out that game, because national
cable presidential debates is not sort of formal academic Oxford, Cambridge style debating, right? And so so how much time does the campaign put into prep for that stuff?
Yeah, so the short answer is a lot. But I think what the gist of that question is, and also what you're alluding to, is that, like, for better or for worse, like, we have a very human candidate, right? With flaws and, strengths and weaknesses and imperfections. And like, that's part of why we love him. That's part of why we feel the urgency and the need to send him all the way. But like, again, it kind of goes back to the question of like, what do we have control over and what levers do we have to really move the needle? And like, not to beat a dead horse, but like, okay, so I'll try to have some more data behind this, which is that if you look at who actually watches the debates, so the viewership numbers went from 18 million down to 8 to 10 million. And it basically has stuck between 8 to 10 million. And if you look at the polling, for example, in New Hampshire, only about 25% of the people of the registered Democrats who were polled said they actually watched the debate. Another 47% or so said they followed the coverage. And then another quarter said they kind of didn't follow it at all. So I agree. I will not understate the importance of, Andrew performing at his best and really performing, because that's what it is. It is an act. It is a show. And again, you can hate the system as much as you want, but you got to play along with it in order to get through it. But the reality is, again, like, what we have control over is, oh wait, is the audio?
No, I can hear you fine.
Oh, okay. I think my earphone just died. Is the capital, is the cash. And the debates matter. They're important. He's hitting now this threshold of performing sufficiently, not where I would love to see it, not where we would love to see it, but he's performing good enough to get us there. And I think we now know that the debates are not going to be that kind of, shining star moment, perhaps, but they are going to be enough. They are going to be enough for our energy and our passion and our resources to take it all the way. Kind of a roundabout way of saying, like, I hear you. And this is, the complexity of the humanity and the, nature of the process, where it favors certain characteristics that are more performative, more emotive, and to the detriment of others. Substance, policy, but again, like, we can overcome that because he is performing well enough. He is hitting that critical threshold for the money to actually make a difference.
You make a great point that a lot of us who are thinking about this stuff all day long, like, will literally be looking forward to the debates as if it were, like a huge NFL playoff game.
But who's watching that?
Yeah, but most of the country has not watched it. Maybe they see snippets from the news coverage after.
And this is among the most highly engaged registered Democrats in the early states.
Yeah.
Of the people you would expect to actually be watching these 3-hour shows, no one's watching them. And again, some people are following every play-by-play, but we're doing good enough to be a part of the conversation where it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Next question is, hey, why doesn't he have a money bar on his site, like a little counter? I don't know if the 30 million is an official goal, though. I know a lot of us have been talking about it, but I don't know if the campaign has a campaign announced that as official or
no. And I think it's like, so much of this campaign has been like, there's some kind of, voice or grassroots energy or someone somewhere is like, hey, I have this idea about where the campaign should go and where the movement must go. And then it kind of percolates and builds, and slowly but surely that becomes enough of a mainstream idea that the campaign then adopts it. And if we push on this, if we say we won't settle for anything less, that ticker will be there, right? So everything that drives the energy behind this comes from like the yang. And that's not like facetious by any means. That's just the reality of how this campaign works. So, what it would take is just literally enough of us saying we're not going to accept anything less.
Yeah. No, I mean, do you think the campaign thinks 30 is too aggressive, or do you think what is your sense of where they're at?
Look, I think like at every turn, and I think Evelyn kind of said this recently on the interview where she was like, I was shocked. And I think my take is kind of similar to yours, where it's like, okay, like, yes, we are shocked. This is amazing. This is incredible. This is historic. But like, we can fucking do this. There's nothing stopping us other than ourselves and our expectations for what we can reach. So I think it really does just follow from what the energy and consensus is on the ground for what we can do.
Jonathan, do you ever play poker by any chance?
No.
So there are these like poker tournaments where everybody starts with the same amount of money, and then basically the winner is the last person standing. Okay. And there's often a moment in the early part of the tournament where your stack, the amount of money that you originally have, starts to dwindle, and you're not doing that well.
Okay.
And there's two approaches you can take. There's one approach, which is, I'm going to nurse this stack, and I'm just going to go a little bit each time. And generally you get what they call blinded out. Like you have to pay these minimum fees or bets each hand.
Okay.
And it's not a winning strategy, but it stretches it out. You get to sit in the tournament longer. But if you really play to win, there are moments where you have to kind of shove. You have to go all in.
Yeah.
And you know that if you do it, you're going to have a major strategic advantage at the table. Yeah. And you're going to have enough to then start applying leverage over other players who don't have as many chips.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like this is the moment when we need to shove.
Yes. And like, again, like it sounds like we're just like rehashing, but like, I think this is so pivotal. It's so central. And like, if you hold back every single phase and really turning point in the campaign thus far, even going back to the point where Andrew decided to do it in the first place, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, as you said, like in many ways, and Andrew phrased this early on, but this is a high variance campaign, right? Mm-hmm. So you got to play to win, because that's the only shot you got.
100% agree. Now, next question is, what policy? Now he's got like, he's probably up to like close to 200 maybe now. Like there's got to be one that you're not in love with. Is there one that you're like, I don't know about that one?
I think that some of the framing around like the specialized schooling expansion or like opening up new campuses in the Ivy League or whatnot, I think that like that focus is maybe a little bit off base, where I think all of our energy and time in the education or higher education space should be focused around public college and community college, and not these like institutions, because coming from someone who's been embedded in them for years, they will not be our saving grace. And like the entire business model is predicated upon exclusion. And so I think that like there's definitely some disagreements, on the margins, but the like on the stuff that matters, he gets it right. And that's really what counts.
All right. Well, I cannot help but ask you a follow-up on this one, because someone could argue like, well, that's easy for Jonathan to say. Like he's literally sitting in probably some fancy dorm in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the hallowed halls of Harvard Law School. And so it's easy for him to say, no, it shouldn't be opened up. It shouldn't be expanded, right? You should sit on your $10 billion endowment or whatever it is.
So I actually wasn't suggesting that, but to kind of take it back. So Bill Deresiewicz wrote this book, Excellent Sheep. And he basically critiques the kind of hoop jumping and kind of pseudo meritocracy we have, where he kind of walks through what it takes to get through these institutions, and then how that then shapes you as a thinker, and then how that ends up shaping our policies as a government. And like, by all means, we should open the gates, open the access. I completely agree on the substance, but just in terms of the framing and focus, it's like there is no secret sauce. There's nothing inherently valuable about these institutions.
Right.
It's like a self-selecting, self-regulating. I think Peter Thiel put it as a Studio 54 nightclub where there's just a long line of people waiting on the outside trying to get in. And that's what drives the value. So that's all I'm suggesting is like, it's just an unnecessary emphasis where just like talking about Trump can crowd out conversation about substance, so too, talking about Harvard somehow, some way just crowds out substance around education.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think what you're saying is, look, it's a great school. There's a lot of stuff you can learn here, but it's not like there's the magic formula on how to be successful that you're learning in your second year at HLS.
and in fact, so much of the core of this campaign and what it's trying to undo in the harms and rebuild in the possibility is like 80% of my classmates at Harvard Law School will go on to be corporate lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
The largest mega investment banks and financial institutions. And so we have, and again, this goes back to Andrew's work in Venture for America, where like our human capital, our financial capital is converging on a handful of cities and a handful of institutions. And like the answers will likely not come from those institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And in many ways, that's what drew me to the campaign and led me to have such a degree of certainty around its importance, is that, look, like I came in here, the child of immigrants, and, you know, had to kind of reverse engineer the system and figure out what all this stuff was, and fed with the same kind of marketing and notions that we have around them. And a lot of that can be dispelled very quickly, especially once you set foot. And so I think that kind of gave me the extreme certainty around the fact that like this campaign and the set of solutions that Andrew's running on is not only imperative, but it's like the best set of solutions, and leaning into the Harvards of the world will not give you the answers that you seek. Trust me.
Speaking from someone who's practically been born there. Yeah, you probably spent enough years on that campus. So here's the next question. One from Marco. One positive thing I hear about Bernie is his ability to be organizer in chief, to pass legislation and engage grassroots. Do you see Yang being able to maintain that momentum in office and engage with the grassroots and pass legislation?
Well, hell yes. I mean, I think you and everyone else who's, you know, stretched and grown in ways they couldn't have imagined, and generated value, whether it be through art or through connection or any form of this movement, is just the best evidence of that. Like creating, like going from 0 to 1, creating something from nothing. That kind of creative destruction is like the centerpiece of this whole movement. And I think you are the best testament to that, kind of moving forward and into the halls of Congress and just organizing all the way.
I agree with you. After he gets into the White House, as long as there's still people that want to watch this channel, I intend to continue covering it and putting pressure, hopefully, on the Senate to pass the legislation.
You're running yourself.
Oh,
you're over 30, right?
Yeah, by quite a bit. Sadly,
you go. So you can.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny that you talked about like how your thought process for running, in that for a lot of people, especially with you know, family obligations, the idea of running for office is not a no-brainer, right? Like even if you thought you could be competitive, the private sector offers great incentives, and when you look at the the kind of BS that people in DC have to go through, it's not, I wonder if, I think it only attracts two types of people. There's like the really selfless people who are like, I don't care. I want to make the country better. And people like yourself, I think, who are just trying to kind of serve. And then there's this other, but I only think that's like maybe 5 to 10%. And then there's this other group that are just like professional politicians.
It's like a fine line with sociopathy.
Yeah. And you're like, I don't know if I want to get in that whole scene. I mean, how was that a hard call for you, or how did you think about that?
So I think this is, really going deeper into why this campaign is so kind of revolutionary. Is my hope is that Andrew getting to the White House will unleash a wave of highly competent, highly atypical people who never thought running for political office would be an option for them, for all the reasons you suggest, all the incentives, all the corrosive incentives we have in place that deter or keep people away from running themselves. And I think Eric Weinstein put it recently when he was on his podcast. He was like, this is a revenge of competency. And so the hope is not only will his administration be filled with, thoughtful people who've been sidelined now for decades from the conversation, but also just open up the floodgates and show like the institutional gatekeepers around our narratives, around our sense making, and around our politics are breaking down. And we're hopefully pushing over that last domino to free people up on the margin who maybe thought about it, contemplated it, but for all the incentives you've laid out, that hopefully we can change with, for example, 12-year term limits for Congress, with, for example, changing compensation so it's not seen as the self-sacrifice that then goes on to become lobbying and regulatory capture. If we change the incentives, then hopefully we can free people up on the margins.
Well, I would love to see you and Andrew lead sort of a new era in public service where people can have successful careers, go to DC for a little bit, and then get the hell out of there.
Yeah, be a human, like live life and like contribute what you can. But this notion that we've been brainwashed with, that it's like, oh, there's going to be a handful of people who are going to spend 3, 4, 5 decades doing the same thing, entrenched in the same circles of influence, is going to break apart before our eyes because we will knock it down. Yeah,
I hear you. Well, so next question. This relates to, actually, it's the inverse of your point about allegations that certain campaigns were paying people. So the flip side of that is that someone's Maxim is saying, well, some Buttigieg supporters are accusing Yang of buying votes with just the freedom dividend in general, or, hey, come to my website and you could win, a chance for the freedom dividend now. What are your thoughts on, is that kind of buying votes? Is that somehow below board?
So obviously to me, it's absurd on its face. Like if you are to take in the most cynical negative framing, like an increase in the minimum wage, a federal job guarantee, canceling student debt, you can frame any affirmative policy vision that puts people first as like, oh my God, you're buying the votes of students who are laden with tens of thousands of dollars of student debt. And it's just that we've let the conversation be framed when it's a giveaway or a tax cut to shareholders that goes into stock buybacks. That's a reinvestment, right? But when it comes to the hands of real people, when it goes from capital to labor, that's somehow votes. And that just absurd political framing on its face.
Yeah, I guess it's interesting. Like any federal program where the citizens benefit, you could argue is buying votes.
Right?
Yeah. So the only way to not buy votes is to take the people's money and just keep it. Yeah. All right. Next question. I've seen this on Twitter a bunch about people who are on disability not being able to stack the UBI on top of their disability benefits, whereas older people on Social Security do get to stack. Any thoughts on why that's the case?
Yeah, so my understanding was it stacks with SSDI, so the Social Security disability. I'm not sure why it wouldn't stack with, I suppose, non-Social Security disability. But I think the general thesis is for certain configurations of welfare and cash-like transfers, like they hit a certain amount, maybe in the low hundreds of dollars. And we know all the incentives that those systems create. I think the like classic example is if you're on a disability benefit, then you have an incentive to not reintegrate, to not re-engage with your community, because we have case managers and a whole system of bureaucracy that will take away your benefits contingent on you proving your disability. So I think that might have been the thinking behind it, which is to lighten up the administrative load and not have people be in a constant state of fear of losing their benefits.
So it sounds like at a minimum, you as a potential congressional representative would be open to people who are currently receiving disability benefits to also get the freedom dividend, or you don't have a strong opinion on it either way, or where do you land on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, in theory, like the goal is to leave no one worse off and to take nothing away from anyone, but to let people opt in out of their own volition if they want unmonitored, unconditional cash as a substitute. But I think it's intended to be this like foundational floor, and hopefully we can do a lot more for people with disabilities than the freedom dividend would do on its own.
All right, now this is a super nerdy question from Andrew Smith, who quotes Weinstein, and he's like, "Hey, do you have any thoughts on Weinstein's view of institutions selecting for lie about growth narratives because of the embedded growth obligation?" I don't even know what that means. Maybe you do.
Yeah, so I kind of referenced that before. I think he's an incredibly insightful and incisive economic thinker. I think that the general point of these embedded growth obligations is he gives the example of, let's say, law firm partners, right? So if you take a corporate law firm, for example, you train people, there's this kind of pyramid, right? Where you train people as associates, as junior associates, and the goal or the story is over time, they will become mid-levels, then they'll become, in their 7th or 8th year, maybe junior partners and then senior partners. And so the entire narrative around the recruiting cycle and the institution is like, the need and the demand for lawyers will continue to grow. But the dissonance, the challenge is that that's not the case. You actually have tens of thousands of law school graduates across the country with very little demand for their services. And so when you have people just basically sitting in purgatory, either with no job to be had or a job that does not require that particular degree, or just in a constant state of being an associate or an associate-like position. And the same goes for academia, where you have people just trapped in the postdoc world because they're bought into a story around, well, you'll become a clinical professor and then an assistant professor and then a full professor. But actually that path to tenure wore out a long time ago because the institutions aren't growing.
Yeah, that is kind of depressing. So not only are those who are in manufacturing and kind of repetitive work is kind of screwed by automation, but even people with sort of white collar skills are already struggling and will struggle even more because, Cravath is not doubling every few years and they don't need that many partners and those guys aren't going to leave anytime soon.
Yes. And David Graeber has described this so well, where he says, because of the changes in technology and in productivity and the nature of work, in this perturbed way, we actually create more middle managers, more people who report just for the sake of reporting, because you only have a handful of individuals and institutions that have market power as the bottom just hollows out.
Yeah.
And then in order to preserve their power and authority in those institutions, they have to hire what he calls flunkies. And they have to create positions that actually are not necessary and don't add value. And so it creates this whole perverse set of incentives, and leaves people, again, in the state of kind of purposelessness and meaninglessness, where they're like, wait, I'm being compensated to oftentimes do literally nothing.
Yeah, I just recently finished the 21 Problems for the 21st Century thing.
Yuval Harari, yeah.
Yeah, and Harari was talking about like maybe the threat isn't between the haves and the have-nots, but the haves and the like they don't have any value in the economy anymore. And like, what are they gonna do? That's pretty crazy stuff. Yeah. Oh, I know you're not going to want to answer this one because you didn't even like the idea that he might come in sixth.
That's the premise of the question.
Yeah, that's right. But since, you know, the audience wanted to know, do you have a view on like what the world would look like if let's say, I guess one scenario is like you could have a Warren presidency, and then another scenario is you have a second term of Donald J. Trump.
So I do reject the premise of this question because this is in our hands. It's like just questioning yourself. It's like, what if I don't live up to my fullest potential and like try my hardest? It's like, yeah, well, that kind of sucks. And you know the outcomes, like what they're going to be. They're just going to be an acceleration of what has been. And so like, there is nothing that we cannot do because again, there has been no institutional support, no media support, like very little even money that's been put into the campaign. And the money that has been put in has largely been saved as other candidates fall out so that it will have a cushion. But like, we should not be willing to settle. Like it is November of 2019. Like there is no, like maybe ask me this question if it's like May of 2020, right? But like, they're like, sorry, this is just like absurd to me.
you want to, I agree. I mean, we've got, here's my, I would agree with you. But I'll react to the question in almost the opposite way, which is that we cannot afford another Trump term. And I also feel like if we have a Warren nomination, I think we will lose the general, which means we'll have another Trump term. And even if she won, I don't think Trump will go away quietly. And I don't think Trump supporters will instantly embrace the Warren presidency. And I kind of feel like if you throw out like the political parties and you just say like, is there a way for us as a country to get together and like move forward together? Who could do that? It would be someone kind of a little bit out of left field, like Andrew Yang. That's like, well, he's kind of a Democrat, but he has this kind of Republican vibe in terms of his love for math and you know, nuts and bolts and figures and facts, and he's an entrepreneur, so he doesn't neatly fall into the, oh, you know, so and so is a socialist, or oh, so and so is a bleeding heart. He comes across, in my opinion, like very, very post-partisan, like kind of like the third way. So that's why I think he has to become president, because I think the alternatives are really disturbing. I saw some survey that said 70% of Trump supporters would be concerned about civil unrest if he's not reelected. So we shouldn't assume that whoever the DNC blesses to be the nominee, if they make it to the White House, will just be able to govern and we'll go back to the Obama years and everything will be like kind of normal again. I worry. Do you worry about like assuming we win the White House, like that what happens to Donald and his supporters the day after?
So I think, again, it kind of goes back to what you were saying, which is like, it's not so much even about Andrew or about Yang or about, you know, it's like, what are the slate of alternatives? What are the options we have on the table, and what is the course that those options are leading us to? And it's like, do some of those options lead us to scapegoat other people, lead us to violence potentially, lead us to a just path of disintegration? And the answer is yes, yes, and yes. And so for me, it's like, again, like you have to look at like, what are the alternatives on the table, and what could actually possibly meaningfully affect our ability to have a stable future where we're not at each other's throats. And constantly asking that question and kind of reassessing that and recognizing that, I think it was, there was some tweet, it captured it well, where the politics of scarcity will not be beat by a different politics of scarcity, right? So vilifying one subset of humanity and replacing that by vilifying another subset, that doesn't fundamentally change the issue at hand, which is that you have to blame some other group of people for your struggles.
Yeah.
And I think the brilliance and the extreme feasibility and winnability of this campaign is that if we have any scapegoat, it's not human, right?
Yeah.
It's the AI. It's the technology, right? And at least we can latch on to our kind of primordial system one thinking as our, animal selves, and say, oh, it's that thing's fault. But so long as that thing is not human, fine by me.
Yeah.
And again, that's where you just land full circle on Yang being the necessary force to move us forward.
By the way, speaking of the power of AI, have you been following any of the news about the quantum supremacy?
So I have been loosely following this, and I have to say, I do not understand a lot of quantum computing and encryption. I don't understand a lot of it.
Well, here's one factoid for the audience. Like, if you took some of the most powerful supercomputers a year ago, or even a week ago, and you had it solve an extremely hard algorithmic problem, like the hardest you could think of, some of those computers, the best ones, it would take them like 1,000 years to solve the problem. Now, with this breakthrough in quantum computing, they can now solve those problems in 90 seconds. So it's like a revolutionary level of processing power that is like unimaginable to any of us, because it's not like going from, like an old Pentium processor to like the latest kind of computer chips today in your MacBook Pro. It's like going from walking to like space travel. and I don't know that Warren and Biden and the others are really like grokking. Yes, of course, Amazon is transforming things. And of course, call centers are going away. But the things that we're going to be able to do with quantum computing, on the one hand, are going to be super amazing and exciting and make life better for so many people. Like, we're going to be able to discover new kind of cures to diseases and things like that. However, they will be dramatically transformative to the labor markets and to the economy, and the whole like, well, every man for himself thing. I don't know if it's going to work. It's not like, because people always say like, oh, this happened before with the steam engine. It's like, no. You guys do not get it. This is not going to the steam engine, man. This is like a whole nother like order of magnitude transformation. Anyway,
right. And two quick things on that is, one, do you see that ever covered in much of mainstream making press media? And then two, based on my very limited understanding, right now that quantum computing power is in the hands of Alphabet, in the hands of Google alone.
This is true. I mean, there are many other companies that are pursuing this, like IBM is big, but it's
like it's predominantly concentrated
in
the hands of maybe one or two tech firms.
Yes, and the rewards will go to the entities that have developed this technology, or probably a lion's share of the benefits will go to a very small percentage of the society. And that just like at some point you wonder like how sustainable is that? Like I don't know. All right, next. This is the flip side of the previous question,
Ooh, okay.
which is like, oh, he's definitely going to win. Who's going to be his VP?
So interesting. It is very. So I'll say my honest first thought is Pete. But honestly, like, who the fuck knows?
Pete does seem to be on board with a lot of Yang's policies.
And he also is, he speaks in generalities, right? And abstractions that can be mapped on to a set of hyper specific policies that is the language of Yang. So to me, that seems like it could work, but again, like, who knows?
So do you think in the general, we would, as a country, be ready for first Asian American, first openly gay vice president, and first freedom dividend? I mean, I wonder if the country can handle all of that.
So I would suggest, like, sometimes we kind of understate like the craziness of the time we live in, and we just have become so desensitized that anything is possible. But I think one fun thing about the Yang at the top of the ticket and P at the bottom is so you have two theoretically New York businessmen on top, and then you have the former governor of Indiana, and then the mayor of South Bay. It just could be like a fun little replacement with some similarities, but then stark differences. But again, like, who the fuck knows what will happen in 6 months?
Yeah, if Yang's on the top of the ticket, I can pretty much be down with, whoever he picks. I'm sure will be fantastic. Let me see if there's any more questions that we can get to before we wrap up. Okay, so for a lot of people have been very curious about your campaign, and some people were saying, oh, well, how can I be supportive of your congressional race? So where can they find more information, and how do they get to know more about you, Jonathan?
Oh, totally. So the website is herzog2020.com. Very original, I know. And it has more information there, and kind of ways to support it. But I think the best way we can do anything to support the movement now, not to circle back. Oh my gosh, you went away. I'm sorry. I knocked my computer over. I was so excited.
I'm still here. We're good. I even put up your website on the screen here for people.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. You were saying the best way that people can help is
30 million Q4 for you.
Very selfless. You're not, a typical politician would say, like, I don't know about Andrew, but I want to get into Congress myself. But you're focused on the big prize.
Well,
yeah.
Again, like, once he's the nominee, like, fantastic. Like, channel all those, efforts and resources and energy, to the congressional candidate's way. Right now, like, we are in the pocket. We have this moment, and we can't let it go.
All right. There's someone in the comments who's very, very persistent. Very persistent. Pig Summer. And I don't want to reward like excessive persistence, but I find the question interesting, which is like, hey, Mayor Pete, great guy, a man. You got Andrew Yang, a man. Why not have a woman? Secondly, why not have a black woman? Any thoughts on that? Would you be down with that? Anybody in particular you'd be interested in thinking about? And oh, by the way, I got another question, which is, what are your views on Tulsi? Because you probably saw a little bit of her in Iowa.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the the top line thought I have on this is just as, and this is somewhat of a cop out, I'll admit, but just as insert Trump into a question or a conversation and then it all gets derailed, so too like the kind of roadshow of the VP selection can kind of derail a lot of the conversation. So to me, it's kind of perhaps less of an interesting question because we know historically, at least, the VP is more of a, frankly, performative role. But like, absolutely, like, you know, having, you know, more diversity and representation on the ticket, and someone who brings a background different from Andrew's, right? I think he said a number of times, having, you know, particularly gender diversity and someone who comes from the realms of Capitol Hill and has relationships in Washington. I think these are all good things, but like, let's not get distracted from the kind of main task at hand, because in many ways it's tangential to the.
Yeah, I will say if I had to optimize for winning, I do feel like some ticket that could help us make sure we have strong African American turnout and very strong female turnout. I think those groups will already come out no matter what because of the way Trump is. But, you know, just like I don't mind over raising in fourth quarter, I wouldn't mind having like a really strong coalition going in and just having a landslide in the general either. But I agree with you. Like, let's focus on getting through. What do you think? Do you think it's the next 3 states? Do you think it's Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, or do you think it's Iowa? Like how sort of paramount are each of those first 3, or do you think that it's like one group?
So I was looking, and it's really hard to extrapolate from any particular election because the dynamics are so different and contextual. But I was looking at the Bill Clinton election. I thought it was an interesting example where I was surprised to recall that in the Iowa caucus, Tom Harkin got 75% of the vote. He was an Iowa local. And Bill Clinton came in 4th place with about 2.8% of the vote. And his whole comeback, his whole rise and ascension to now decades of influence was New Hampshire. He
the comeback kid.
Yes. And he only came in 2nd place with 20% of the vote. But that was the monumental comeback that, you know, ultimately he ended up losing. And if the past 2 big Democratic primary cycles are any evidence, it's going to be a long, hard-fought primary well past Super Tuesday. So I don't think resting our hat on any state in particular, not even Iowa. I think the investment in New Hampshire is so smart because you're seeing that happen simultaneously with, for example, Kamala now firing a lot of the staff, transitioning a lot of them to Iowa and other states. And so I think that data point was really interesting to me, is looking at Clinton's election and how New Hampshire became this turning point.
Let me give you the what I've been I've been calling the Nerdstradamus prediction. And let me see if you think that I'm being too pessimistic. But I actually would be very happy with the 5-4-3 outcome. 5th in Iowa, 4th in New Hampshire, 3rd in South Carolina. Oh, you need more.
I hate it already.
You want more. You want more power. What are you looking for?
Like, I don't really care what the pathway and placement is.
Right.
Again, like, so much of this is path dependent, and like no one would have thought, like no one could have predicted that Beto O'Rourke of all people would have dropped out this past week. Right. So things change on the dime. And that's why, you know, it's so critical for us to like stay so focused, so focused on like our goal at hand, because we have no idea who's going to drop out in the days and weeks to come. And the great thing about us is like we only have room to grow. So I don't care if it's like 3-4-2 or like 1-1-1 or 5. Like to me, it like that.
But it sounds like you would also be disappointed by 5-4-3.
I mean, that just sounds like, why would you start with like a not winning position? But you know,
Okay. Okay. Cool. One last thing that I'll share with the audience, because we've been talking about money a lot. There is a new Nerds for Yang or Secure the Yang fundraising challenge that I'm helping organize, and it's going to be about 10 Yang Gang content creators, and we're going to basically do a team raise, and we're going to try and raise $50K in November. And just so you guys know, $50K could buy a couple of like TV ads in Iowa. Like Jonathan, you would know, like $50K probably you could put it to work, right?
Like half of an ad.
Yeah, there you go. So if we all pitch in and do our part, we think that number one will help the campaign get some more money. Number two, I think it'll result in more content being created, and all of the Yang Gang creators out there are probably having more impact by the content and getting the information out there than the dollars we raise. Although we want the dollars too. And then the third thing is, if we get the 50, Andrew will do a panel interview with 3 of the creators who participate in this challenge. And 2 will be based on how much they raise, but the third will be randomly selected from the participants. So it's not just sort of like the people that raise the most get to do the interview. And then everybody that's participating will be able to submit questions and everything like that. So I'm going to announce on Monday or tomorrow the participants in the Secure the Yang challenge. And so I just wanted to let people know that that's coming. You're going to be hearing us asking for money a lot in November, but I think it's because, as Jonathan points out, this is the time to pull out all the stops. And if we do, we change history. And if we don't, it's going to be 10 times harder to get through.
So actually, that's a really, I think, under discussed point, which is like, there can be this, so A, it's like the positive and affirmative case for what we can do, and there's no stopping us. But also, it's like there's this tragic chilling effect that can happen when campaigns of such promise and growth and dark horsedom don't perform.
Mm-hmm.
And that is like something we have to avoid at all costs. That kind of chilling effect. One example is I was a supporter kind of early on of Larry Lessig when he ran in 2016.
Me too.
Oh, awesome!
I gave money to that guy.
And he ran on campaign finance reform, and that was the core of his campaign. And then Zachary Teachout ran on it in New York a number of times, and we have to we have the potential to avoid that kind of chilling effect, where it will only snowball and build on itself as it continues to grow.
Yeah, having a 30 million fourth quarter or some big fourth quarter will have outsized positive benefits. Having kind of a lukewarm fourth quarter could be like getting cut off at the knees. It would be really hard. So, well, Jonathan, I've got good news for you. We're going to fucking do it.
Yes,
we are going to do it. We're going to get the 30 million and we're going to get the White House. Yes. We can debate over what the ordering of Iowa and what Nostradamus says, but that's fine. We'll just get the White House at the end. And I just want to thank you so much. I want to encourage everybody to check out Herzog2020.com. And this is a guy who is technically going to school, canvassing in New Hampshire, running for Congress, spending almost 2 hours on random YouTube live streams with people like me. So if he could do all that stuff, we can all do it a little bit more as well. And hopefully all of us together will be partying at the inauguration.
Oh my gosh.
Are you ready for that, man? That's gonna be so awesome.
It's amazing. It's gonna happen. But yeah, let's fucking do it.
All right, man. Well, Jonathan, I will let you go. And to everybody watching, thank you to the 200 concurrents who sat through a good long discussion, and it just goes to show you how the Yang Gang is one of the most, I think, curious, active learning groups that I've come across. Like people who really want to get into the nuance, and don't we need more of that in this country? So thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.